And joining me now is AP Foreign Policy reporter Josh Lederman. He's in Washington. Okay, Josh, I want to get your reaction to Trump's reaction to the travel ban. Have you ever heard of a president going after a federal judge this personally and somewhat trying to take away his legitimacy?
It's very unusual, but there was some indication that this might be the way Trump would approach his job when he was campaigning, and he went very hard after a federal judge over the immigration and saying that judge who had been involved in a case involving Trump's businesses, really couldn't rule on it fairly because he was Hispanic, and Trump had been pledging to go very hard after immigration. So we've seen Trump before try to go directly after people that he sees as his adversaries, even if it's somebody who's a federal judge who's supposed to be a neutral arbiter of the law. And what we don't know is how that may affect his ability to really litigate this with the government and with opponents of this policy in the days ahead.
So the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department have both come out today saying that they're going to follow the judge's orders and reverse course. So how do you navigate this water when your boss is the President of the United States?
Well, the government employees that are doing this don't really have a choice because, a federal judge has now ruled on this, and it is a ruling that at least temporarily applies nationwide. But I think the key question here is, how do you navigate what seems to be a bit of chaos? We had this order come down and there not be a ton of explanation or preparation with the agencies that had to develop the way to put it into practice. That created a lot of the confusion that we saw in the initial hours and days at the airports. And then, finally it seemed to get a little bit smoother. And then we had a number of rulings ending with this ruling just last night that added further confusion to this. So it's been a very up and down process for the federal government to try to put this into practice. And as of now, we don't know whether the White House will succeed in convincing the system to be able to put this back into practice.
And we're still trying to get our hands, Josh, around what President Trump's foreign policy will look like. And you wrote, President Donald Trump's spats with U.S. allies as close as Mexico and as unlikely as Australia are leaving his new Secretary of State and others in his cabinet to clean up a lot of potential damage. It's a good cop, bad cop dynamic that could define America's foreign policy for the next 4 years. Explain what that means and what message is the U.S. really trying to send to the world here?
Well, we don't know what the exact message that President Trump will end up sending, other than that throughout his campaign and in his first weeks in office, he's pledged to really take a different approach, a much stronger approach that puts America's interests ahead of the interests of other countries. But what we've seen is this emergent dynamic, as you said, where the president comes out, says something that seems very antagonistic, has a very harsh phone call with Australia or Mexico or another country, and then it's left to his cabinet secretaries, the people who really are doing the nitty-gritty work of this, to try to reassure people. So we saw Secretary of Defense Mattis in Asia this week, in Korea and in Japan, saying, don't worry about, some of what Trump said in the campaign about our alliances. We are committed to your security. We see Secretary of State Tillerson out there talking about the way he wants to run his department, and honesty and respect, in a bit of a different tone from the way President Trump has talked about his diplomacy. So what we don't know is how sustainable that is. Can you have cabinet officials who are taking a really different approach and tone from the president and have that work out in the long term?
I want to ask you about Iran. We know that they're holding military exercises today. This comes after the White House has imposed new sanctions. What do you think the message is they're trying to send to Iran? And is there anything you can read within the tea leaves here about how their take with Iran might be?
Well, we know that the Trump administration feels that the Obama administration was far too soft on Iran, and there are a lot of members of Congress from both parties who agree with that sentiment. So we've seen the U.S. in Trump's first days slap some new sanctions on Iran for its ballistic missile test, really increase the rhetoric, say that they're putting Iran on notice to stop destabilizing behavior, including the support of the Houthi rebels in Yemen. But the interesting thing that we haven't seen the Trump administration do is repeat the pledge that Trump made in the campaign to renegotiate the Iranian nuclear deal. That's something they seem to have backed away from, and are suggesting that even as they try to enact penalties on Iran for other behavior that contradicts UN Security Council resolutions and other laws, that they're probably not going to rip up the nuclear deal that has rolled back some of Iran's nuclear enrichment activities.
We also saw Defense Secretary James Mattis make his first foreign trip. He went to Japan and to South Korea. How's President Trump's meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan next week? We expect him to sit down with him next week. What do you think that will revolve around?
Well, Japanese officials have been telling me they're really hoping that they can come and have a productive meeting that establishes that the U.S. is committed to having the kind of relationship with Japan that it has in the past. Japan was really rattled when Trump, toward the end of the campaign, talked about the need for Japan and South Korea to basically defend themselves, and maybe they should develop their own nuclear weapons so they don't have to be protected by the U.S. nuclear umbrella. That's not something that people in Japan really want. So they're hoping for a suggestion of the status quo continuing. But the relationship has also been pretty fraught recently over the fact that Trump has pulled the U.S. formally out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this sweeping free trade deal that the U.S., Japan, and about a dozen other countries painstakingly negotiated in the final years of the Obama administration right now.
Josh Lederman, thank you so much for joining us, Josh.
Great to be with you.